Thank you, Liz.
Not to get too terribly technical here, but if you would just briefly give us an overview of the study. 17 times higher sounds like cause for serious alarm to the layperson like myself.
Well, what we did was to ask a simple question. We sampled between 60 and 70 houses and asked if you were living near a gas well, were you more likely to have contaminants in your water? The things that we looked at included gases such as methane and ethane and propane, and also some things associated with either fracking fluids or with naturally deep water from underground. Right. And the answer to the question was yes for methane, and in fact for the other gases too. Not only was it 17 times higher on average, but essentially all of the very high methane values were when people lived within about half a mile or so of a natural gas well. And also the isotopic signatures, the fingerprinting of the methane, made it look like deep methane underground. What we did not find was any evidence for fracking fluids.
Right. And before we get back to that, which I think these are two separate things, and both of them are equally concerning for different reasons, obviously. The industry, and we've had some industry people on the show talking about the safety and the need to, if there's proper oversight for drilling. But, everyone sees those pictures where you can light your water on fire, and the industry says, well, that's naturally occurring. There are places where you can light your water on fire, just has nothing to do with drilling. That's not what we're talking about here.
I don't think that's what we're talking about here. I think there are documented cases in that area of people who historically could light their water on fire. I have no doubt that that's true. What we saw, though, was a very clear relationship that leads me to conclude, and the data suggests that that's really not what's occurring.
Professor, we're actually learning just right now that the state is expected to lift a ban on hydrofracking. And this is obviously something that we have been expecting for some time. The DEC is supposed to be reporting out tomorrow, and people are obviously quite upset about this. Do you believe that drilling can take place, in fact, safely?
I think there are people who want to believe that fracking is dangerous, period, always and under all conditions. And I don't think that's true. I think there are also people who want to ignore the increasing number of cases of methane contamination, spills, disposal issues. And I think that's a mistake, too. What we should be doing is documenting those cases, understanding those cases, and then using them to prevent similar occurrences from happening elsewhere.
How does one do that? In other words, obviously, look, nothing is fail-safe, and there's no way that you can tell anyone that anything is 100% safe. Not driving in your car, not, I don't know, walking across the street. What needs to be done, in your mind, to prevent people from having their wells contaminated?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to assemble a good data set of pre-drilling observations, and that's something that New York has the opportunity to do, and also my home state of North Carolina is very likely to legalize horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing next year as well. So we're essentially on the same timeline, I would guess, as New York. So gathering lots of information is always helpful. I think being open about problems when they occur, and that's difficult for companies in a litigious society, but being open about those problems and trying to understand them, working with state officials, industry, academics, and other groups, I think there's a lot to be said for again, using those problems and trying to understand them.
We're actually talking also about something that potentially could bring a lot of money into the state. I mean, just today, I'm looking at a report from the Buffalo News that there are wells in Susquehanna County, which of course is in Pennsylvania because, again, there's no drilling yet in New York, capable of producing up to 30 million cubic feet a day. I mean, that is significant. Is there a correlation between the amount that you pump in terms of volume and the safety?
I don't know that there is necessarily. We don't have any data or information on that. There may be a correlation between the pressures involved in pumping and perhaps the pressures involved in fracking and the likelihood of a leak, but I really don't know. There is a lot of money at stake, and these are areas. A number of these areas are relatively poor, and the money involved is a lot for people. So I think, again, the goal of our work from the beginning has been to try and help people do this more safely and to understand the problems that occur.
When you looked at the results of your study and you saw that, in fact, there was a higher concentration of methane, but not of chemicals related to the fracking process, did you think actually that that was a positive outcome in terms of the industry, that actually people would be pleased with that?
Well, to be honest, I did. I mean, if we had 500 new wells that we could sample, and all of them showed that there were no problems associated with fracking, for me that would be very good news, and for our group that would be good news. So yes, we were quite clear from the beginning that we did find strong evidence for gas contamination. For the things that we looked at in hydraulic fracturing, we did not find any evidence of that. Yes, I thought that would be good news. And I think it is good news. We've had some criticism because we did not look at all the organics and other things, that some of the acids that are also found in hydraulic fracturing fluids. But what we did look for, we didn't find. So I think it's a good news, bad news case, and yes.
Well, the other thing, and look, methane is, not only is it flammable and could explode, but it also could cause asphyxiation. I mean, we're talking about something that's quite serious. So on the one hand, no chemicals related to the process of extracting natural gas. However, methane actually is quite serious. Are there things that people can do to minimize themselves, not the industry, to minimize the exposure that their own water has to methane?
Well, there are and there aren't. The first thing is what we discussed briefly before, and that's to make sure that as many homeowners as possible get a certified pre-drilling test for their water.
Right.
And that's the first thing that they can do. And that's useful not just for the homeowners, but also for the companies, because it allows industry to point out cases where a problem existed before drilling. And that's equally important. That's the basis for Pennsylvania's presumptive liability rule, which suggests that any problems within 1,000 feet of a natural gas well that arise are assumed to be caused by that natural gas well unless a company can show otherwise. And that generates a lot of data testing and pre-drill testing that I think is productive. Pennsylvania, interestingly, has just proposed to overhaul their Oil and Gas Act to increase that presumptive liability buffer to 2,500 feet based in part on our data.
And would that be something also that you would suggest that New York might consider if, in fact, they're going to be moving forward and lifting the moratorium?
Absolutely. I think there are a whole series of issues that I would think strongly about for New York, and that we're also recommending here in North Carolina. Presumptive liability is one of those issues. Setbacks is another example. So setbacks from municipal water supplies, setbacks from homeowner wells. I think setbacks from property lines are an issue too. Then lots of other recommendations in terms of liability, sampling, documentation, and things like that. But yeah, I would encourage the state to do its homework as it is, and to take the best of what's happening in other states and apply it to New York.
Yeah, and just in closing, you make some recommendations for the federal government. I mean, it's always easier if the federal government makes final decisions and implements them so the entire nation is under the same standard. One of them is the full disclosure of chemicals used in hydraulic fracturing. This is something that they've been trying, the Democrats in the Senate, for example, have been trying to do, attaching to various energy bills. It hasn't worked so far. Is that, in terms of all the policy recommendations that you make from a federal standpoint, which one of them is the one that you think would be the most effective?
Well, full disclosure of the chemicals in the fracking fluids makes complete sense for many reasons. The states are taking matters into their own hands already. The states of Wyoming and Texas have some new disclosure laws that are fairly stringent. Other states are following suit, such as Arkansas. So one way or another, we'll have that. The full disclosure makes sense for several reasons. It makes sense for human health. If there's a spill, someone can be treated more quickly. It makes my job easier if I'm trying to track a chemical in the environment. I need to know what's there. And I think maybe most importantly, it will put pressure on drillers and the companies doing the hydraulic fracturing to reduce the contents, the volume, and the identity of toxic chemicals in their fluids. And I think ultimately that will be a very positive development.
Well, Professor Jackson, I want to thank you very much for this. And it's obviously very technical, but if people are interested in receiving or looking at this whole report, can they find it online?
They certainly can. They can find our original paper at the Center on Global Change at Duke University or the Nicholas School, also our policy recommendations and other things. So thank you for your time, too.
It's my pleasure. Thanks very much.